Okay, the next item of business is a debate on motion 17733 in the name of Jackson Carlo on behalf of the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee on a blueprint for participation embedding deliberative democracy in the work of the Scottish Parliament. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Jackson Carlo to speak to and move the motion around about 10 minutes. Mr. Carlo.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And just at my advanced age, in case I otherwise forget, may I move the motion in my name? And can I begin by referring back to the most recent debate we held on the Standards Committee debate on committee effectiveness? Because the Minister for Parliamentary Business, who I'm delighted to see participating in this afternoon's debate, challenged me to delve into history. He was very disappointed I hadn't come up with an example which predated that had been quoted to us. So I'm going to start in the 5th century BC, on the Hill of Nix, where citizens could gather in the agora to discuss matters and vote on them. These were the first citizens' assemblies, so the concept is not a new one. True, diversity may have been somewhat lacking, with only men able to vote, and probably only such as those men able to vote besides. But the concept of giving citizens an active role in democracy is one that the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee has been exploring throughout this parliamentary session. 2.5 millennia on, the blueprint we have proposed will help to embed the spirit of the Athenian agora in the work of the Scottish Parliament, sitting appropriately as it does in the Athens of the North. So here then is the opportunity for the Minister to become Scotland's Socrates, Scotland's Plato, Scotland's Aristotle. When I look at him, I'm not sure that's what I see exactly, but today is his chance to prove himself the equal of ancient Greece's finest, and I look forward to his confirmation of same. In all seriousness, though, participation as a principle for how this Parliament operates is, of course, not new. It's there in the foundations, one of the principles set out by the Consultative Steering Group on the Scottish Parliament, and it's part of the way we work in the Chamber and in committees. And after almost a full session of the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee looking at how to embed participation in the work of the Parliament, I hope the principle of public participation actually now sells itself. So this time I'm here to talk about the approach the committee has set out in our report and blueprint. And our proposals represent really a relatively modest investment, an incremental way in which to embed an approach that is at the cutting edge of deliberative practice and has an incredibly positive and powerful impact on participants, supports scrutiny, and can help address some of the most important challenges we face as a Parliament. Since our last report, which we debated here in the Chamber, there have been 2 further People's Panels. They are groups of around 25, one on the Climate Change Scotland Act in 2009, and one on reducing drug harm and deaths in Scotland. And these groups of 25 are randomly selected people who broadly represent the demographic makeup of Scotland. They don't decide things. They make recommendations which the committee, which Parliament, which parliamentarians ultimately decide. But they're brought together to consider a particular question. They hear from experts and are supported by trained facilitators to consider the information in front of them and agree on recommendations. People's Panels in the Scottish Parliament context are very much tied to the scrutiny work of Parliament's committees. They are not muscling in the role of committees or duplicating the work being done by MSPs. Of course.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful to Jackson Carlo for taking the intervention. Will you get the opportunity in his speech to talk about the necessity of the question that's framed for these groups? Because I think there's a great deal of importance in what is asked as well as how it is asked.
Jackson Carlo.
I entirely agree with that, and I will seek to try and address that in my contribution as well. But they are looking at an issue where a committee itself feels that the input of a panel would be useful, and the panel's report and recommendations go to the sponsoring committee to inform their own scrutiny work. Now, I'm not going to claim that People's Panels are a panacea, but I'm clear from the work my committee has undertaken that they can be an important part of the solution to a number of problems we must address if this Parliament is to evolve in the way it delivers for the people of Scotland. Now, all members will be concerned by some of the shocking figures we've seen on the declining trust in politics. Last year, the National Centre for Social Research reported that the British Social Attitudes Survey showed trust and confidence in government are as low as they've ever been. In the 2024 Life in the UK Scotland report, gave Scotland a democratic wellbeing score of just 39 out of 100, and the findings included that 63% of people disagreed that they could influence decisions affecting Scotland, and sadly, 38% of people had low levels of trust in us, the MSPs. Now, we know from the independent evaluation of the People's Panels what a positive impact they have on trust in the Parliament for those who participate. To give just one example, more than 90% of participants in the Climate Change Panel responded very or extremely to the statement, "I feel like participating in the People's Panel has improved the way I feel about the Scottish Parliament and the work it does to hold the Scottish Government to account." That in itself is to be welcomed. But there is also the potential for the impact of panels to be felt beyond individual participants. They take their experience and their knowledge with them back to their own families and communities. Panels also show the Parliament at its best, giving focused, considered attention to important issues and drawing in a wider range of diverse voices to hold government to account. Of course I will.
Christine Graham.
My image on the screen would be enough to halt you in your tracks, but obviously not. Mr Carlow, I have huge regard for these efforts, but there's a little bit of me that always says, even with People's Panels, the people I really want to reach, and I'm sure people in the Chamber members want to reach, are the very people who have never voted, who are in the housing schemes, who see nothing of worth in any of us, whatever political hue or any rank in it, whether it's council or whatever. How on earth do we reach out to those people? And I'm not, undercutting what's being done. It's just you feel somehow we're never going to reach these people.
Always through the chair. Jackson
I'm very grateful for that intervention, and I apologise. It was the uncustomary lack of bling today that meant I didn't quite catch Christine Graham when she stood. But I see her now, even though my eyesight fails at my advanced years. She will be pleased to know that the way in which we reach out actually specifically does what she asks. The randomly selected people very often have never participated, some have never voted, some have never had any engagement in the political process at all. So actually the People's Panels and the way in which they are selected and chosen does reach and does bring in some of the very voices that Christine Graham is concerned that we should seek to reach. I will.
Stephen Kerr.
Because part of the problem, and I'm sure Jackson Carlow will agree with this, is that the 2.7 million people who voted in 2021 for this Parliament, many of them are currently feeling real disenchantment with this place and with its members. Can he articulate how 25 people, for example, and I don't say this in a derisory way, how do 25 people make any difference to the 2.7 million?
Jackson Carlow, I'll give you the time back.
This, I said, was not a panacea. The recommendations on the principle of deliberative democracy and People's Panels extend also to government, and government must make its own decision about whether or not it wishes to pursue the idea, as in Ireland or as in Paris, countries and cities that we visited, of having a wider national forum in which people are able to participate. Our recommendation is one for Parliament, and it's modest because we recognise the financial constraints, and it is that we would have 4 People's Panels in the next session, one in 27, 28, 29 and 30. And secondly, that these panels should be run in line with more detailed principles we set out in the blueprint. And thirdly, that the panels and the overall approach should be evaluated during session 7 in order to maintain quality and then determine what we might do in session 8. And that's where the very question Martin Whitfield wishes to raise, I think, is important, because I think we have identified that the broader the subject, the less able it is to come to a specific conclusion. So it is important that the criteria, the question which people are debating, is tightly focused and understood. And I think that's what the 2 pilots have actually demonstrated. In many ways, the one on drugs, I think, was more successful than the one that was looking in a post-legislative way, in a more general sense, about the issue of climate change, because it's such a huge topic, it kind of bewildered people as to what the focus of the inquiry might be. We've also highlighted some other areas we'd like to see this work develop further, particularly ensuring innovation and continuous improvement remain part of the approach, and also thinking how we can best harness the extremely positive impact on individual participants to use the panels to amplify other participation and engagement work the panel does. We've been clear that this is only one part of the overall scrutiny and engagement landscape. I hope I've explained, engaged and enthused members what I'm here to do on a sunny, dry summer's afternoon when people's minds stray elsewhere, to enthuse you in the course of my speech. But for anyone who is still unsure of the values of people's panels, I leave you with this quote from one of the participants. Deliberative democracy is a gift to the people of Scotland and its electorate. In Scotland, we actually appear to be ahead of the game compared with many countries. In the people's panels, we felt representative, represented, relevant and listened to. That's how people should feel when they engage with the Parliament. That is, in one of the participants' own words, the gift of people's panels. And that's why I urge members to support the motion and ensure that the Scottish Parliament's proud tradition of innovation when it comes to public petition continues incrementally, modestly in the next session of our Parliament.
Thank you, Mr Carlow. I now call on Jamie Hepburn. Minister, around 9 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I begin by commending the committee for the work that they have undertaken on this inquiry and this report. I commend the convener for rising to the challenge and taking us further back into the realms of history. This challenge began with Stuart McMillan, who is with us indeed this afternoon, who started in the 1930s. It's continued through Mr Whitfield and the subsequent debate to, I think, the 18th century with Edmund Burke. Quite a leap back to the 5th century BC. I think we should stop the challenge before the next debate, where someone might cite Fred Flintstone in terms of their contribution. But I'm going to resist the temptation to reflect on Aristotle's 6 forms of democracy. Safe to say, of course, we remind ourselves of his great concern about democracy and demos, the rule of the mob, and I will not reflect as to which group in this Parliament I consider to be the mob, Presiding Officer. I want to begin, as Jackson Carlow did. He quoted very powerful words from one participant, and I was very struck by words of another participant cited in the report. The words of this participant struck me. They said, "I've still got a voice, I still get to dream." There is, I think, Presiding Officer, something powerful about those words. They speak directly to the founding principles of the Scottish Parliament on power sharing and equal opportunities. We should be endeavouring to ensure every person in Scotland feels empowered in this way. What impresses upon me most is the way in which they are reclaiming their power. That is not to say that there aren't concerns in this regard. Concerns are being heard about those not being involved in public discourse, and those concerns are growing not just here in Scotland but internationally. I see those points raised in the committee's report as well. Where people feel they have no voice, where people feel that they are not heard by their Parliament as an institution, or their parliamentarians individually, or indeed by their government, the trust is vital to our ability to deliver better outcomes for people is chipped away. According to the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, feeling as though you have a say in government actions is a greater influence of trust than socio-economic or demographic characteristics. The principles and methods of public participation are vital in rebuilding that trust with Scotland. I was pleased to see in the report tools alone will not restore trust in politics. In April, the First Minister convened a gathering of civic, faith, trade union and political leaders. They committed to taking action to safeguard Scotland's democracy and tackle people's feeling of feeling unheard and feeling disempowered. I believe we have a shared responsibility here to support the growth of trust in this institution as a Parliament, and for those of us who serve in ministerial office in government. I'd like to record my support and my appreciation for the committee's ambitious work in putting forward this blueprint for participation and deliberative democracy. These are important steps being taken to acknowledge the positive impact that participatory approaches have on people and the way in which decisions are made. I commend the report's acknowledgement of the resource-intensive nature of this work, as well as its clear long-term plans to make efficient and cost-effective choices that take into account future resilience needed to support this work. And I would like to reinforce the importance of the evaluation process, the inclusion of seldom-heard voices and the involvement of the voices, in particular, of children and young people in these plans. On this work, I welcome and will continue to encourage collaboration between the Scottish Parliament, Scottish Government, local government and indeed other institutions across these islands. President Officer, this report is geared towards, of course, how the Scottish Parliament might consider public participation in the longer term. As a member of this Parliament, I consider this to be an important area for us to collectively reflect on. I speak, of course, today on behalf of the Government, and just as I reflected on in the recent debate on committee effectiveness, it is important, I think, to re-emphasise it's not for Government to tell Parliament how to do its work, but perhaps I can set out a few ways in which the Scottish Government is working to the same agenda of public participation. As a member of the Open Government Partnership, the Scottish Government is committed to building trusted relationships with civil society to deliver on our mission to improve the lives of the people of Scotland. This year we will be co-creating our next action plan, bringing together different areas of government and civil society to drive forward innovative, ambitious and impactful actions to ensure people can see, understand and be involved in the decisions that affect them and their communities. Participation is one of the core principles of open government, and this year alone I have seen what can be achieved through that approach. Recently, colleagues worked with students at the University of Edinburgh to create a framework for case studies showcasing the value and impact of open data. We are now seeing the impacts of Year 3 of the Just Transition Participatory Budgeting Fund in the North East. Over 18,000 people took part in determining how this fund could best be disbursed, with 47 successful projects. And with the next Open Government Action Plan, we are looking to take a more strategic approach that will enable us to achieve even more on trust, on transparency and on involving the public over the course of the lifetime of the next Parliament. Looking wider at the Scottish Government's efforts to embed and institutionalise participatory methods and approaches, we place great value on community empowerment and providing opportunities for people to participate in the decisions that matter to them. To give one example of this, just last month we announced £50,000 funding to support piloting a citizen assembly in Dunfermline in partnership with Fife Council and the Electoral Reform Society. This project will also provide valuable learning for our joint Democracy Matters process with COSLA, designing new community decision-making models to support communities across Scotland to take ownership of important decisions. This is a reminder that transparency and participation in public life isn't just a matter for this government, for this Parliament, but also for local authorities as well. President Officer, I want to thank the committee for the acknowledgement and support of the Scottish Government's work so far in exploring the potential of deliberative democracy. I also welcome the scrutiny and accountability the work of the panels and of the committee brings to the activities of the government. There are two areas the committee wishes to explore regarding the Scottish Government's work and our own efforts to embed participatory and deliberative approaches. The first is in the work of the Institutionalising Participatory and Deliberative Democracy Working Group, who I met with just last week to discuss how we can work together to progress and move forward the agenda of participation. Whilst progress has been made in some regards, there have been some significant limits to delivery of these democratic innovations. However, we are working to progress the recommendations where we can. We've held people's panels, citizen juries and lived experience panels. Work is underway across government to build capacity, capability and the skills of Scottish Government civil servants. This has been through the development of guidance, training and procurement frameworks for our colleagues. We are not as far advanced in progressing the recommendation to create a centralised team with the authority to coordinate participatory work in Scottish Government. But this is something I continue to explore and work with my officials on. And I will be continuing to work closely with colleagues in the Scottish Government and with the working group to progress their key recommendations and uphold Scotland's commitments to deliberative democracy. The second issue that the committee has raised is the payment of participants. I'm pleased to say the Scottish Government has been able to publish guidance on paying participant expenses and compensating them for their time. The Scottish Government officials have been in conversation with UK Government officials over the issue of whether payments for involvement in research or public participation interact with benefit entitlements. Understandably, this is of great concern for stakeholders and members of the public, and I'm grateful to the committee for identifying this as an issue. I have to say, unfortunately, at this stage, a shared understanding with the Department for Work and Pensions on this issue has not yet been reached. We remain concerned that restricting benefit claimants to voucher payments communicates a lack of trust and risks discrimination. We will continue to work to raise these concerns with the DWP and hope to be able to resolve them. President, let me conclude by saying I very much look forward to hearing from other participants in today's debate. I'm encouraged by the ambition and forward thinking I see in the proposals put forward by the committee. As pointed to throughout the report and from my own experiences as Minister for Parliamentary Business and co-chair of the Open Government Steering Group, this is part of what Dr Mark Geddes would describe as a wider ecosystem. This work cannot be done in isolation or with tools alone. There are cultural, there are behavioural, there are structural changes that need to take place in collaboration and partnership between governments, parliaments and civil society. This is continuing to take us further forwards and realise for more people in Scotland the power and importance of their voice and the impact they can have on the decisions that affect them.
Thank you, Minister. I now call on Maurice Golden. A generous 8 minutes, please, Mr Golden.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. As a member of the Citizen Participation in Public Petitions Committee, can I start by thanking all of those who participated in the committee's review into the embedding of deliberative democracy in the work of the Scottish Parliament. Particular thanks go to the members of the public who have taken part in the Parliament's People's Panels, and to the clerks who have supported the committee with its work and in the production of this report. So in turning to the report, it would be worthwhile for Parliament to reflect closely on the wider issues alluded to throughout it, notably one of eroding public trust and a feeling of disenfranchisement in our political processes and institutions. The first point of the report is to note that when this Parliament was established, one of the founding principles set out by the Consultative Steering Group on the Scottish Parliament was that the Parliament should be accessible, open, responsive and develop procedures which make possible a participative approach to the development, consideration and scrutiny of policy and legislation. And the second point of this report is to highlight the warning of the 2017 Commission on Parliamentary Reform, which stated that failing to engage meaningfully with citizens can lead to dissatisfaction with democracy and a lack of trust in the decision takers. The stark reality is that here in Scotland, public trust with our politicians is at an all-time low. The 2004 Life in the UK Scotland report gave Scotland a democratic wellbeing score of just 39 out of 100. That should be the 2024 report. The findings included that 63% of people disagreed that they could influence decisions affecting Scotland, and I wonder what percentage that would be for members of the Scottish Parliament. Happy to.
Stephen Kerr.
I'm grateful to my friend for giving way. He mentioned the Commission from 2017, and he's just mentioned the statistic of the Scots who feel that they can't influence this place. But the reality is, if I am correct, the 2017 Commission made a number of really straightforward, I would call them low-hanging fruit sorts of recommendations on how this place might be reformed, and none of them, to my knowledge, were taken up. It was an excellent report and nothing was done about it. So if parliamentarians and others who are sitting on commissions can't affect change in this place, no wonder ordinary Scots feel that they can't influence this place either. Does he agree with that?
Maurice Gold.
Well, I think some of the recommendations were taken on board, but to be honest, they were largely niche and limited in their nature. And ultimately, in order to build that trust, we need to go far further and far faster. Happy to give way to Ben McPherson.
Ben McPherson.
I thank Maurice Golden for taking that intervention, and similar to what he's just said, does he agree with me that while recommendations and formal considerations are important, actually a lot of the challenge we face is about the broader context and style of our politics and how we address participation in that way?
Maurice Golden, I'll give you time back for the intervention.
Yeah, I'll certainly come on to the culture which we're seeing develop, quite a concerning culture for our society and our politics, in my opinions. You need to only look at some of the language used routinely in press releases to hopefully share my fear about the direction of travel. Because ultimately, in terms of this dissatisfaction, it's easy to blame external factors, but that's too convenient because it ignores the responsibility we have as elected representatives to promote and protect the public's trust in our democracy. The reality is that after 14 years in government, the UK Conservative Party, for a number of reasons, lost the trust and support of the electorate and were handed a resounding defeat in last year's general election. Then the electorate handed power to the UK Labour Party, but in less than a year, they've had what can only be described as one of the most spectacular falls from grace in recent political history. The polls now showing the public's confidence in them has evaporated. And for their part, the SNP's mission to separate the UK has of course led to deep rifts in Scottish society, while at the same time confidence in Holyrood has been underlined by a series of policy failures, from our education system, net zero targets, our health service, anti-social behaviour, the list goes on. And when I call out the failings of the Scottish Government, then I can easily be accused of political bias. But the crux of this is that the public are very much aware of these issues. They see them every day in their communities, in schools and hospitals. And then they see their elected leaders of all colours play a spin game, completely unwilling to put their hands up and take responsibility for any of this, and tell the public when they got it wrong, that things aren't really that bad, or that problems we do have are actually someone else's fault. But again, the public can see right through this, and they are fed up of the spin, the false promises, the half-truths, the gaslighting and the shifting of blame. So where does this leave us? Well, if the doorstep activists from all parties are to be believed, Scottish politics may be facing a seismic event this Thursday. Whether that's a small tremor or a political earthquake, the ramifications will be felt by all major political parties in Scotland and beyond. And when this happens, the political class may be better served by a period of self-reflection, asking themselves, why has this happened, and searching for the answers internally. However, a moment of self-reflection may mean they have to address some hard truths. But back to the point of this debate, deliberative democracy characterised in this report as an approach to democratic participation that allows members of the public to engage in inclusive, respectful, reasoned and informed discussion and debate on significant issues, with decision-making informed by this deliberation. This session, the focus has been on utilising people's panels focused on policies and climate change and drugs deaths. I welcome this approach and would like to see it expanded, which I hope Parliament agrees to. In addition, I would welcome the expansion of these panels to budget allocation processes. This is already used in Mearns Castle High School for classroom resources and by Angus Council in the design of play parks, with children the key decision makers in both examples. A note of caution on people's panels. Even when the government accepts recommendations, it doesn't mean the desired outcome will be met, as we have seen with climate change. Which brings me back to the central point of trust. If we're serious about embedding deliberative democracy throughout the Scottish Parliament, then Scotland's elected representatives should reflect carefully on the state of politics right now. We must start listening to the concerns of the electorate, engaging them in a meaningful way, and most importantly, being honest with them. If we want members of the public to engage in inclusive, respectful debate, then maybe politicians should try a bit harder to do the same.
Thank you, Mr Golden. I now call on Martin Whitfield, a similarly generous 7 minutes. Mr Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer. And it's a pleasure for us to follow Maurice Golden with regard to his contribution about where we sit. I think, in some senses, more than the point of today's debate. But I do think there were some fascinating insights that were put in. I would think it's only fair that from the Commission on Parliamentary Reform we finished the quote that Mr Golden chose, because they went on to say that effective engagement, particularly using more deliberative methods, can improve transparency and policy making by bringing different perspectives, knowledge and skills to the scrutiny process. And I think, interestingly, that second half of the quote very much encompasses the excellent work of the committee. And I pass on my thanks to the convener and to the committee and those to support for what has been a fascinating journey throughout this session with regard to deliberative democracy, in one indeed that I think the convener himself will admit he has been on a journey with as to the validity of it. And I think it speaks to one of the strengths of this session, that people have been able to change their minds on certain things, and perhaps, to speaking to the trust element that was raised earlier, that ability to change your mind and for that change of mind to be accepted because the evidence is now pointing in a different direction is a very important empathetic element of what being a politician is. And I think the citizens' participation in the deliberative democracy that we've heard articulated in the blueprint is an opportunity to do that. And my intervention on the convener about the importance of the question actually goes to, I think, one of the fundamental challenges, that where we have asked too much, or we have asked a question because actually we have a different problem, deliberative democracy doesn't produce us an answer. If we pose a problem that we don't have an answer to, that there isn't an agreed position, there isn't an entrenched position on, actually, it allows our citizens, it allows those people who send us to this place in a variety of forms, but are responsible for sending us here, the opportunity to truly influence the really important part, which is the thinking that goes on after that as to what the solution is. And it may not be the solution that the Citizens' Panel come up with. There's nothing wrong with that. It may be only in part. It may lead, actually, to us recognising there are other unknowns that we are unaware of. But the involvement in the panel, I think, from all of the post-scrutiny work that has been done with the existing panels that we've had, show that when it's properly engaged, with a proper question, with proper framing, with proper support, and with a response at the end, even if it is one of disagreement, the satisfaction that those people take from participating allows them to give up their time over 3-4 weekends, whatever it is. But also, more importantly, it brings them closer to their Scottish Parliament. I had some concerns with what the Minister for Parliamentary Business was discussing from the point of view of the Scottish Government, because I think, and I will be critical on this point, I think the most disappointing citizens' assemblies we've seen in their results is perhaps those that were started and operated through the Scottish Government rather than the Scottish Parliament. But this is a learning exercise for everyone in Scotland. And I wonder, and this is probably not the place, for a discussion about where that vehicle should lie. Should it lie with the Parliament, where absolutely the Scottish Government could come and pose a framed question or a problem? Or should it lie with a lot of different people? Because I think experiences of differently run citizens' panels, differently supported, differently articulated, does run the risk of actually damaging the concept to the point where everyone will go, oh, it's another citizens' assembly. And I think that would be disappointing, and perhaps one for the next session. Of the points within the blueprint, which I recommend, I recognise and accept virtually all of them, the principles for the topic selection, the delivery and the committee engagement, I think is massively important. I am concerned about decisions resting perhaps with the conveners group. We don't know what that committee will look like, if it will be a committee in the next session. I don't think that in any way alters the proposal going forward, but maybe it is a different vehicle. Because it allows me to talk about the committee inquiry that the committee I have the privilege to chair is looking at the moment, and how we improve the culture on committees. And I think one of the interesting things that I have had and read and talked to members of this chamber who have interacted with citizens' assemblies, and hence my reason for going to the convener's journey himself, the effect of talking to members of the public who've taken part in this, I have found fundamentally moving for those MSPs who have had the opportunity to do it. They see the opportunity from sometimes lived experience groups, but most importantly, just general people from across Scotland who have taken, I hope, have taken the time to vote in elections and things to come forward. But actually that interaction with elected members, I think, has been fundamentally and very, very important. I want to go back to a quote from Frederick Vandenberg, which I think encompasses one of the challenges that we have. And it uses the phrase government, but I think Parliament may be better. Government is legitimate not so much because it represents the general will, but because its policies are ideally and counterfactually the result of the public deliberation of all who are concerned by the decision. And that would allow me to go, of course, back to JP McIntosh, the former MP for East Lothian and the Borders, who talked so succinctly about actually decision-making resting as close to the people who it affects as possible. I think one area that I would hope is looked at in the next session is both post- and pre-legislative scrutiny by citizens' assemblies, because I think it allows us to frame the question of what do we want out of this legislation. It allows us to frame the question, has this legislation been successful? And then actually to entrust those people to whom the legislation potentially affects or has affected, to investigate it with support and then report back what the reality of the decision is. It may need not, as has happened in certain committees, looking at entire pieces of legislation. It can just be one small part. But particularly post-legislative scrutiny is an area that we need to do better at. We talk a lot about achieving within this place and across the Parliament, but actually we need to see the fruits of that bear. And with pre-legislative scrutiny, it may indeed prevent some of the incidents that we've seen of substantially elongated Stage 2 sessions, because we actually know what the legislation is seeking to achieve. So in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, I'm looking forward to the contributions on this wholeheartedly, with the exception of the conveners panel. I fully support the blueprint that's being proposed, but also the iterative nature of it that is conservative in nature with the 4 panels, but also that request from this session to the next to review the success of otherwise and to keep building on it. So I'm grateful.
Thank you, Mr Whitfield. And I now call on Maggie Chapman again. A generous 6 minutes, Ms Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to begin by thanking and paying tribute to all the people who have taken part in the People's Panels and other participatory and deliberative processes that the Scottish Parliament has undertaken so far. Thanks too to all those who made these processes possible, our wonderful participation and communities team. I'm grateful too to the members, clerks and researchers of the CPPP committee for their considered report and for their endorsement of People's Panels and the value that deliberative processes have for our democracy. Today I speak not just of processes and policy, but of people, because at the heart of democracy, true democracy, are the people it serves. It is long past time that our Parliament not only speaks to the people of Scotland, but with them, and that it listens to them, enables them to help us shape all of our futures. The Scottish Greens have always believed that democracy must be participatory, deliberative and just. That belief in grassroots democracy is one of our core principles. along with ecological wisdom, social justice and non-violence. These are not abstract ideals, they are living commitments to transformation. And that transformation begins with trust. None of us can pretend that trust in politics is strong right now. In fact, it's crumbling. As we've heard this afternoon, according to the 2024 Life in the UK Scotland report, only 39 out of 100 rated Scotland's democratic well-being positively. Nearly two-thirds of people don't believe they can influence decisions that affect their lives. And more than a third have little or no trust in us, in MSPs. This is not a failure of the public. It is a failure of our institutions, of our democratic structures, of us, to include and to listen to the people we seek to represent. However, there is hope. Hope found not in empty gestures or online consultations, but in something deeper, that deliberative democracy, through methods like people's panels, citizens' assemblies, and co-designed processes. We can give voice to those so often silenced. Those on low incomes, disabled people, young people, people of colour, those living in communities far from Holyrood. And this is not just a theoretical exercise. The People's Panels piloted in the session of Parliament on climate change, on drugs deaths, on participation itself, they have shown us the power of deliberation done well, informed, respectful and inclusive. These panels brought together people from across our country who deliberated with care and compassion, who brought lived experience and local knowledge into sharp policy focus. And crucially, when asked, a majority said that taking part in a People's Panel improved their view of the Scottish Parliament. In a political age designed and defined by cynicism, here is a model that builds hope, builds trust, builds democracy. But to realise that vision, we must embed it. And the committee has given us a blueprint, a detailed, practical and inspiring model to make deliberative democracy a permanent feature of our Parliament's work. One panel each year, clear criteria for topic selection, transparent processes, robust evaluation. This is not some lofty idealism. This is governance grounded in practice and principle. But we know that there will be resistance. Some will say it's too expensive. I would argue that we cannot afford not to invest in democratic renewal for all of our sakes. Some will say it won't be representative. Yes, I'll take it.
David Torrance.
I thank Maggie Chapman for taking an intervention. On her point of being too expensive, at £55,000 per panel, which is 0.0554% of the Scottish budget, do you think that's well worth it for participating with the Scottish public and engaging with them?
Always through the chair, but Maggie Chapman.
Can I thank David Torrance for his intervention? Absolutely. I think it's not only worth it, it's an incredible value if it does give us that democratic renewal and help us rebuild that trust in the politics that we all seek to participate in. Yes.
Jackson Carlo.
And I'm grateful for the point she makes, because I think Mr Torrance is correct that the cost of this is all quite modest. It seems to me to be a far better use and commitment of our approach to deliberative democracy than, say, the contribution of one of my own colleagues who's retiring, who suggested we create a Scottish House of Lords. That would be a very expensive and I don't think terribly democratic way. It may give them something to do, but it would be a very expensive and less democratic route, surely, than the People's Panels and the deliberative democracy route that we're looking at.
Maggie Chapman.
Jackson Carlo for that intervention, and yes, we probably all have people who would like to shuffle off into a closed room somewhere, but in the Greens we fundamentally are opposed to any second chamber that is not elected or of the people in the Scottish Parliament. The House of Lords is undemocratic and should have no place in the 21st century Scotland. Some will say that these panels wouldn't be representative. But these panels use sortition, random and stratified sampling, so participants reflect Scotland's diversity. And this is arguably more representative than most of what happens in this chamber and this building more generally. Others will argue that it won't make a difference. But we've seen real impacts. Panel recommendations have informed debates, led to accepted government policies, and even helped shape legislation. That is meaningful scrutiny. That is public power in action. Presiding Officer, this Parliament was founded on the principle of power sharing. We committed to openness, accessibility and participation. That is the vision laid out in the Consultative Steering Group's founding report. But if we are honest, our practice has not always matched our promise. So now is the time to close that gap. Let's be clear, this is not just about improving scrutiny, although it does that. It's not just about better policy outcomes, although it delivers those. It's about democratic justice. It's about shifting power away from party rooms and towards the people of Scotland. Because the issues we face, climate breakdown, inequality, housing insecurity, drug-related harm, these are too urgent and too complex to be solved without the people they affect. We need their wisdom, their insight, their experience. This is how we move from rhetoric to reality. Deliberative democracy brings new voices to our debates, new legitimacy to our work, and new energy to a Parliament that often feels disconnected from daily life. It can beautifully complement our representative democracy. So, Presiding Officer, I will end where I started, with a member of the public, a participant in one of the People's panels, a woman in her 70s who had never before been involved in politics. And I quote, "I thought my voice was so relevant. It feels really good to have taken part in that. People's panels would be a great thing to do for the future." So let's honour her voice, the voices and the voices of so many like her, with action. Let us pass this blueprint, let us fund it, let us embed it in standing orders, and most of all, let us continue to imagine a Parliament that is not just for the people, but of the people and by the people, for a better democracy and a better Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. We move to the open debate. Members may have picked up on the hint that we have a little bit of time in hand, so members will get the time back for interventions and also a bit of latitude with their speaking time allocations. And I call first Evelyn Tweed, to be followed by Stephen Kerr. Around 6 minutes. Ms Tweed.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We are elected to represent the people of Scotland, to ensure their voices are heard and acted upon. But as we've heard, trust in political institutions is at a historic low. The committee's report highlighted the power of more deliberative methods for not only improved scrutiny, but improved transparency. The positive impact cannot be argued with. Participants report a more positive view of political institutions and a greater understanding of how processes work. Participants are also more willing to change their opinion when presented with new information, in contrast to the polarisation and fixed opinions that characterise much of public debate today. This is an excellent result, and I would like to thank the convener, the committee and particularly Parliament staff for their work in this area. I welcome the plans set out to increase deliberative democracy in the form of people's panels, and I note suggestions for further development. This includes reviewing the accessibility of deliberative processes, as well as developing processes that work for young people. My contribution today builds on these suggestions. Participants in people's panels are randomly selected to ensure a diversity of voice and involve individuals who may not normally engage. I think this approach has a lot of value. However, I do think further consideration should be made of strategies to engage groups who are marginalised and may face additional barriers to access. The report does acknowledge that additional support may be needed to allow people to engage in these panels. In addition, it seems to me that there are some areas of policy and legislation which have the requisite broad impact, but where it would be nonetheless appropriate to choose a panel who are specifically affected, rather than a broad cross-section of society. Dr Rebecca Mason from the Young Women's Movement advised me that young women consistently told her that they feel excluded from politics and democratic processes in Scotland. Indeed, recent research from the Young Women's Movement found that half of young women surveyed do not trust politicians and decision makers in Scotland to advocate for their human rights. I think that's a really worrying statistic. When there is a lack of visibility of women in public office, young women do not feel encouraged to get involved in politics at all levels. This can have a detrimental effect on democratic well-being, which is compounded for young women of colour, disabled women and trans women. I acknowledge the positive impact, as described in the report, of having panels in Parliament and the ways in which this makes people feel more involved. However, going elsewhere may allow people's panels to be targeted in specific areas that are facing particular issues or where engagement may be lower. Measures such as the Travelling Cabinet acknowledge the importance of meeting people where they are. I attended the Parliament's 25th anniversary celebrations in Alloa. People on the day were absolutely delighted that Parliament went to them. It allowed them to participate more easily, and it allowed us to see the activities that they cared about locally. There are also frustrations in our rural communities, and we hear that in every committee. Going to them signals a commitment to hearing them and understanding the issues that they face. It also lifts barriers of cost and difficulties accessing public transport and childcare. The Scottish Rural and Islands Parliament and other organisations are already doing excellent work generating a rural movement. Youth local action groups across Scotland are mobilising young people and building engagement. Could people's panels be designed in collaboration with these movements to work with and contribute to existing networks? As the Status of Young Women in Scotland report says, time alone does not drive progress. Real progress towards equality, including equal access and influence over policy decisions, needs active effort. I ask that the committee consider these additional barriers in the next phase of its work. And I also think possibly the committee need to consider its own gender balance. The Young Women's Movement reports that in 2018, young women overwhelmingly call for more opportunities to engage in politics. Now, in 2025, they feel like even if they had opportunities to engage, they would not have the power to affect change. This is an opportunity for us to show them otherwise, to show them that their voices and their experiences matter, and to show them that we are listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Tweed. I now call Stephen Kerr to be followed by Christine Graham. Around 6 minutes, please.
It's a pleasure to follow Evelyn Tweed. And I think that she hit a nerve, I think, certainly in my case, when she talked about members of this Parliament being prepared to change their mind when presented with evidence. I think if there was more evidence-led scrutiny in this place, that we would have an enriched Parliament. And I think the people of Scotland would recognise that. And I want to begin by paying tribute to Jackson Carlaw, who is undoubtedly one of our finest parliamentarians. And his committee, the Citizen Participation, I can see him making fun of that compliment I've just paid him. I think we'll have a vote later as to whether I'm right. I think I am. But the work of the Citizen Participation in Public Petitions Committee is indeed, I think, the very model of the engagement that Evelyn Tweed was talking about. Because to have a petition to this Parliament, you just need to have one signatory. I had a young fellow approach me at the weekend. How do I make a petition to the Scottish Parliament? And I actually felt great pride in saying, well, all you've got to do is go to this web page and how many signatures do I need? He said. I said, you just need one, just you. And your petition will be taken seriously because we have a committee dedicated. Now, that is the kind of level of engagement that we should be modelling throughout this Parliament in terms of our accessibility to the people of Scotland, because let us be in no doubt, while the blueprint for participation is a serious piece of work and one that seeks to respond to the problem that we've all identified and are speaking about, there is a deep and growing disconnect between the Scottish Parliament and the people of Scotland. And I would say that for this institution to be 25 years old, we are facing critical days, weeks and months and years ahead as to whether or not we will be found wanting as an institution, as representatives and members of this institution, in the eyes of the people of Scotland, in terms of a word that I don't think has been used in this debate so far, and that word is relevance. Our relevance. Because one of the things that I'm really concerned about is that we use these tools, which are undoubtedly there and can be useful, as a deflection from the work that we should be doing as members of the Scottish Parliament. The work of scrutiny should not be left to an assemblage of 25 members of the public. It should be the work that is our meat and drink in this Parliament. And I think we can do better at it. I think we need to up our game collectively when it comes to scrutiny, particularly of this Scottish Government. And I absolutely will. Yeah.
Ben McPherson.
Thanks, Stephen Kerr, for taking intervention. I think he makes some important points. Scrutiny, of course, is a broad word and can be interpreted in different ways. One of the shop windows, shall we say, to this Parliament that most people see is First Minister's questions. Do you think that as both a place of scrutiny and as a mechanism for engagement in our democracy should change?
Always through the chair. And Stephen
I
Kerr.
do, and Ben McPherson tempts me now completely to set aside anything that I've pre-prepared for my speech, to talk about the very many ways that I think our Parliament can be improved. I think there are some very simple things we could do to make our Parliament more watchable, more topical, and more relevant. But I wish to return to the blueprint for participation, because it doesn't. It is the intention of it is very clear. I think have I got the luxury of some time this afternoon?
You have got a lot of luxury, Mr. Kerr.
Oh, I'll take every intervention.
Martin Whitfield.
I am very grateful to Stephen Kerr taking the intervention and very tempted to return the style of intervention that he so often uses, but I'll refrain from that. One of the things that is developing in this debate, which I'm slightly concerned about, is that citizens' panels become a tool to improve solely the reputation of this place and of politicians. Should we actually return to the fact that when we look at citizens' panels, what they produce invariably turns out to be invaluable in the actual decision-making process, and actually the reality of a citizens' panel, that it may well, ideally hope it improves a lot of other things, but as a tool for solving what is frequently a very troublesome question, they both invariably work, they invariably come up with authoritative ideas that we can develop. Would the member agree with that?
Stephen Kerr.
What I would agree with my friend about is the fact that people's panels, no doubt, along with a whole plethora of different tools available to a parliament, are an interesting way of engaging and deliberating over policy, etc. I do get that. But my fear is that we frustrate the members of the public who engage with the parliament, because he paints a very positive picture of the output of people's panels. But I'm not entirely sure that's representative of the experience people have had with people's panels in this Parliament. They have undoubtedly engaged at a level where their words, their counsel, their wisdom has been very useful, but it's not always been taken up as evidence when it came to the deliberation on policy.
Whitfield.
I'll take the convener.
Take Martin Whitfield first, and then I'm happy to.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, maybe about to reiterate the point that the evidence from the participation, in particular the petition committee panels and other committee panels, has shown is an overwhelming support from those who took part, even when some of their ideas can be taken, because they were the completion of the loop. They were referred back to as to what was happening. I think that was slightly lacking in the Scottish Government one, but I think that the evidence is that within the panels that have taken part in this survey and for the question, there's been a very positive response from those who took part.
Stephen Kerr.
I have absolutely no doubt there's been a positive response from the participants. That is not what I'm saying. I'm talking about how responsive this Parliament is in general to the presentation of evidence, however it comes to it. Where I think, in terms of scrutiny, whether it's pre-legislative or occasionally, if we ever do any post-legislative scrutiny, that evidence is not entirely acted upon. And I think that's a failure of Parliament, and I think it's a failure of the Government. And I'm very happy to give way to the convener of the committee.
Jackson Carlaw.
Well, I mean, the point I just wanted to make is really similar to the one Martin Whitfield made, and this was what we found, whether we were in Dublin or whether we're in Paris or engaging with people in other countries and with the panels that we have had in pilot here, is that those who participate will accept that their ideas may not be taken forward because it is for parliaments to decide, so long as people go back and tell them that that is the case and why. I think the great cynicism and lack of trust in this process is where recommendations are made by people who give a lot of time and effort to doing so, but then are left high and dry and never hear anything more about it, and then wonder what the purpose and value of their contribution was. Communicate back, yes or no, they'll accept that.
Stephen Kerr.
I really appreciate that intervention and the light that Jackson Carlaw sheds on that issue. But my basic premise, I'm afraid, presiding officer, is that this Parliament's problem is not a lack of tools for participation, but it's a lack of seriousness, a failure to take itself seriously as an institution of scrutiny and accountability. And I think just look around the chamber this afternoon. Look around the chamber on any of the occasions, and we've had a few recently, when this place has had the opportunity for members to stand up and talk to each other about how we can be a better Parliament for the people of Scotland. Just look around you now. There's hardly anybody here. Most of the people that are here have been sent here by their chief whip. That's the reality. And so we've got to take more seriously the responsibility we have, and no process or innovation, no panel, no forum, can substitute for a Parliament that has forgotten how to hold power to account. And we must not allow MSPs or government to use this tool or any other tool to shift responsibility or decision-making elsewhere. We must not allow government to circumvent the democratic Parliament of Scotland by creating hand-picked deliberative bodies. Deliberation matters, yes, of course it does, but so does representation and so does accountability. And I'm always happy to give way to the Minister.
Minister. I mean, he talks about the government handpicking these panels. This is about Parliament creating these panels. Government isn't selecting participants at all. So what on earth is he talking about?
Stephen Kerr.
I think he needs to go back and listen to what I actually said. I've got it written down here. I'm talking about the fact that we shouldn't use these consultative tools as a deflection from the work that rightly belongs on the shoulders of highly paid members of this Parliament. And so let us speak truth, even more highly paid ministers. Indeed, he's remonstrating to himself. Let us speak truthfully. I would be very happy to give way to the Minister.
My remonstration is with him, not myself, because he read out part of what he said, but he didn't continue to address the point I made. He was talking about how the government had selected participants to take part in these panels. The government didn't. It's Parliament that did. That's the point.
Stephen Kerr.
About parliamentary speeches is that the Speaker gets to decide what he has said and what he meant. I'm happy to give way to Stuart McMillan.
I thank Mr Kerr for taking the intervention. I mean, I've listened very carefully to the debate so far. I've listened to Mr Kerr's comments, but my point to Mr Kerr is that surely, if following his logic, there is a responsibility on every single member of this Parliament to act appropriately. And to use his word, I think, to take the Parliament seriously. Because there are many occasions over the last number of months, but you can point to Thursday afternoons, where many MSPs from some parties leave early to go home. Now, I would argue, when I'm one of the ones who's here Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I would argue that every single member should be in the Parliament, whether taking their place online or in the chamber, actually participating in the work of this Parliament.
Stephen Kerr.
Well, Stuart McMillan makes a very good point, and I can't really add to what he said, but this is supposed to be a full-time job, and indeed, I think, in the way that many members pursue it, it is a full-time job. I give way to Oliver Mundell.
I thank
Oliver Mundell.
I thank the member for taking the intervention. I hear what Stuart McMillan says, and I think if people are checking out early to go home, that's problematic. But many members across this chamber represent constituencies that are far away from Edinburgh, where genuine local democracy is taking place, where constituents are expecting, as Evelyn Tweed said, for people to come to them, to take the Parliament to them. And that's also part of the job of an MSP. and I would be worried at the suggestion that remote proceedings are being used improperly, because I think many members do use that to do a better job.
Stephen Kerr.
I think Oliver Mundell makes his point really well, and I'm not sure that was entirely, I'm not going to speak for Stuart McMillan, but I think he was making a valid point as well, and that is that those who are elected to this place ought to do the work that they do. I mean, I take the point Oliver Mundell's making. He's obviously making a very valid point about distances and so forth. But this Parliament meets for very few hours, actually. This chamber meets for very few hours in a week. And you know, here we are again on a Tuesday afternoon, as Jackson Carlo says, a beautiful sunny day outside. Here's a few of us gathered together talking about the workings of this Parliament, most of our colleagues not here. We could be discussing many other things in the time that we're here. And in fact, we could expand the hours in which we sit in this chamber. We could expand the hours that are set aside for committee. Other parliaments meet for far longer during the week. As I think you will know, I think I'm thinking of one parliament in particular. But the majority of people in Scotland who believe they cannot influence what happens here is a growing majority. And that really should be a wake-up call for all of us, and the relevance of this institution matters. Now, I happen to believe that last week's treatment of Douglas Ross was a defining moment, because whatever one's party, his exclusion from this chamber, and listening to the points of order he raised earlier this afternoon, I feel the issue runs very, very deep in this place. And I also have to say the justifications offered by anonymous spokesmen of this Scottish Parliament also deeply, deeply damaging to the reputation of this place. And it's not just to one individual, as I say, it's not just to one individual this applies to, but it's to the Parliament itself. And when Parliament becomes a place where political sanction trumps public accountability, it ceases to be worthy of the trust that it ought to command. And we, as individual parliamentarians, and collectively must rebuild that trust, not with PR exercises or flim-flam, but by changing how this place works. And that starts with scrutiny. Serious, unflinching, independent scrutiny. When committees do that well, as the Finance and Public Administration Committee did just last week, with its redoubtable convener at the helm, things get noticed. Things get noticed and they're recognised as things that matter. That is what the public want to see. Ministers being questioned, policies being examined, and Parliament working on their behalf. And I conclude, because I'm getting... I have had a very generous allocation of time, which I'm very, very grateful. The bottom line is that this is a moment in this session of Parliament for reform, real reform, and that reform must come from within. We have work. Well, members are getting ahead of themselves, I think. I mean, are we now to prescribe the word? Are we now to prescribe the word in this Parliament? No, I don't think so, because reform is exactly what our Parliament needs, and we who are here in this Parliament, we must be the ones who make that reform happen. Otherwise, our relevance to the people of Scotland will continue to diminish in their estimation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Point of order, Mr. Carlo.
I am concerned, given that there is a parliamentary by-election taking place this week, presiding officer, that we don't bring in the politics of that parliamentary by-election to our proceedings this afternoon. And I'm sure that wasn't my friend's intention, but it would be most unfortunate if it was seen that way.
I would share your conclusion, Mr. Carlo. I now invite Christine Graham to be followed by Faisal Chowdhury. Around 6 minutes, Ms. Graham.
Oh, I was hoping for 15, but there we go. I wonder, Mr. Carlo, what was making your face redden during that last
Always
discussion.
through the chair.
Anyway, I'm going to return to the report. I very much welcome this debate and assure Jackson Carlo that I will be wearing sufficient bling tomorrow. It's not known for me not to be noticed, if that's what it takes to get a word in. But in this debate, I think it's particularly pertinent, seriously, when we see less and less engagement with the democratic process. I think a new low was reached at the last UK election, when just 59.7% of those entitled to vote did so, and Labour has an overwhelming majority with just 34% of that 59.7%. First past the post also distorts the voting, in my view, in a UK election. In council elections, it's worse. Sometimes just around 25% of those entitled to vote do vote. And in passing, I say to Stephen Kerr, public engagement, accessibility is certainly better here than in Westminster. It's not perfect, but it's a good sight better. However, a looming culprit in the erosion of democratic engagement is the ever-presence of social media, where there is little accountability for content and serious political issues can be and are reduced to a Twitter exchange. This cannot in any shape or form be defined as debate. Whatever one thinks of the Beeb, it at least has to aim for journalistic standards. Here I make the pedantic distinction between misinformation and disinformation. The former is information which is inaccurate or wrong, but not necessarily deliberate. Disinformation is deliberately misleading. Can't take the teacher out of me. So let's not muddle them, but call a spade when it is a spade. The report by the Parliament Citizens Participation Public and Public Petitions Committee, what a title, takes on a tough task as to how to engage with the public at large, something we've been trying to do in this establishment for many years, with its engagement particularly with this Parliament, particularly through its committees. I've been a convener of 4 committees, Justice twice and Health twice. I know how hard it is, through initial calls for evidence, and certainly for oral evidence, to overcome the usual suspects in quotes as witnesses. And I don't mean this disparagingly. It is merely shorthand, because, of course, you need to say here from the Chief Executive of an NHS board or the Chief Constable for Scotland, but it's so difficult to have one might term ordinary members of the public, though I agree it is best if the focus is narrow for the interaction to have most import. This can be achieved through private meetings. We've just finished this particular submission then, certainly. This can be achieved through private briefings, one of which I chaired as convener of the Justice Committee on the impact on victims of rape and sexual assault of the court process. It was harrowing, but it also allowed the participants to expand on the difficulties to overcome in evidence to the court. And I recall one participant stating that she just wanted, in quotes, her day in court, close quotes. I gently corrected her and said no. And she was quite taken aback. I said she didn't just want her day in court. She wanted her day in court and a conviction. I asked her to consider gently that it would be worse to have that day in court and a not proven or a not guilty verdict. Now, that was a difficult exchange that could only happen in the security of a private briefing because, as they say, it was freely a two-way street. I take Mr Mundell.
Oliver Mundell.
I thank the member for taking the intervention. I'm interested in her point earlier where she intervened herself. And I just worry that there's a danger in some of this, that these participative committees kind of become an alternative to real people taking part in the committee process. And they might be an easier way to do that. But I think we need to look at how the committees gather evidence, because I think there are, as she says, good ways of doing that. But I just worry they'll become sort of secondary, and that this will be the chance for those most disadvantaged to participate in our Parliament. And I think we should look at the other processes too.
Christine Graham.
I don't think that's the thrust of the committee's report, and sometimes that's overcome by a round-table discussion, which allows the various witnesses to interact with very little intervention by MSPs, and sometimes you get good evidence out of that. It's very difficult for the official report, but it is another method. But I think this is just part of the process. I'm going to recall, I think something similar was being suggested, where the Justice Committee held a light-touch, regulated discussion on mock criminal cases presented to different groups. It was structured in such a way that each group could determine the penalty to be given to the accused on trial, a narrow, focused topic. Firstly, there was limited evidence to the background of the accused. Penalties then were pretty draconian. More background information was introduced with the effect that judgments on the appropriate disposal changed. They were modified. What had been black and white became, if you'll forgive me, shades of grey, not 50, but shades of grey. I thought that was successful because it had a narrow focus and there was a detailed discussion about what was appropriate in each case. It wasn't simple judgments, it was complex judgments. Now, the report supports this. I refer to paragraph 65, and I quotes, "Participants in deliberative processes tend to come out knowing more about the topic and are willing to revise their opinions in light of new information and opportunities to deliberate together. This is in striking contrast to much current public debate, which tends toward polarisation, fixed opinions and misinformation." I refer you back to the example of many years ago the Justice Committee did on penalties for various crimes. But I would also caution against giving the public expectation that their views would have greater or indeed lesser value than their elected representatives. I think that would undermine trust even more. It sort of reminds me of victim impact statements, which people think will do far more than they actually will. They will not change the conviction that is given at the end. So you must make it clear exactly what this is and is not for. And I refer to paragraph 66. Yes, I will.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful for Christine Graham taking the intervention. And isn't it right? It goes back to formulating the question, framing it. It's about an understanding of what this group of people are being asked to do, what the potential effect could be, and then the feedback as to what that effect was. So it is being very open with this group of the expectation, but also a completion by telling them what has happened is very important.
Christine Graham.
Indeed, this also relates to what Oliver Rendell said. It's not to substitute for the formal processes of Parliament. Excuse me. So if I refer to paragraph 66 of the report, quotes, "While deliberative democracy and participation more generally are important tools to support the work of the Parliament, we agree that public participation will not be suitable for or resolve every issue and be one of many evidence sources used to make decisions. In these situations, credibility and trust can be maintained by being open and transparent about how decisions are made," close quotes. So again, it's to make clear exactly what this is for. It might be very valuable what public participation brings out, may not be, but it certainly means they're part of an involved process, a genuine involved process. So I obviously agree with members that we must improve engagement with the wider public, particularly in the work in committees. So I think people's panels are a modest improvement, which I support, and that's not a criticism, but being realistic. And give an example. Personally, I hold my surgeries in Tesco with my messages and my trolley at my side, right next to customer services. In my small way, I hope that reduces barriers to meeting me as a politician. I'm just a woman out with my shopping, and I think it's helped to make people engaged just in that small way with myself. If that can be expanded where people are less intimidated by politicians and politics, then we may get value from the participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Graham. And I call Faisal Chowdhury to be followed by Ben McPherson. Around 6 minutes, Mr Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to begin by joining members in thanking the clerk and parliamentary staff who assisted with this work, including those who supported the operation of People's Panel. I would also like to thank the researchers who completed the evaluation of the People's Panels this session. We often hear of the bubble surrounding Holyrood, where the public feels are discounted between the decision made on their behalf and their lives and priorities. This disconnect is well documented, with polling showing trust in politics and politicians falling. Through the committee work in improving participation, we have endeavoured to break down those barriers and move to a system which builds understanding. When this subject was last brought to the Chamber in 2023, after the committee published its report into public participation, one of the recommendations made was the launch of 2 People's Panels. 2 People's Panels have now been completed on drug harm and deaths and post-legislative scrutiny of the 2009 Climate Change Act. Looking at the results of both panels, we can see the deliberate approach the committee recommended has been successful in informing government and parliament. and welcomed by those who took part in the panel. The People's Panel on Drug Harm and Deaths had 18 out of its 19 recommendations accepted by the Scottish Government, informed the questioning of ministers, and was praised by the members and its evaluation. The People's Panel on Climate Change was also accepted by the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee and will be implemented into the Scottish Government's strategy. Evaluation of the People's Panel shows those who took part not only gained knowledge of major issues facing Scotland, but had their estimation of the Scottish Parliament and its work improved. 75% reported they would get involved in the work of the Parliament in the future, including one woman described herself as a serial non-recycler, saying she was seriously considering setting up a climate action group in her community. This is, of course, welcome. And if our target is to improve trust and participation in politics, this could be considered a success. However, participants only reported a moderate level of confidence in the political impact of the panel. We should be clear that the success of deliberative democracy depends on Parliament and Government's ability to seriously listen and put recommendations into action. If the public believe they are completing a pointless exercise, results will be worse and the benefit lessened, leaving us back at square one. That is why I welcome the clause in the blueprint of participation, which recommends that committees seek responses from the Scottish Government and commit to giving a considered and reasoned response to all the panel's recommendations. That brings me on to my final point regarding tracking impact of People's Panel. It is important that participants are well informed of the workings of the Scottish Parliament and how their recommendation may be implemented. If this work is continued in Session 7, improving tracking of impacts in the long and short term could help inform future practice of the impact of expectation by participants and allow for consistent readjustment of the deliberation process. Ultimately, the power to rebuild trust in politics relies on us. It relies on MSPs being out and visible in our communities and listening to people's concern. People's Panel are not a panacea to rebuild trust in politics or solve complex issues. But the evaluation of both panels completed this season does show they have a serious role to play in informing scrutiny and delivering improved public participation. I hope members agree we should be looking to take this further next session by embedding People's Panel into the work of Parliament and build a new process of deliberation with the people of Scotland at its heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chowdhury. We now move to the final speaker in the open debate, Ben Macpherson, around 6 minutes. Mr Macpherson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. When the debate began, this important debate, and the first speaker on behalf of the committee talked about the historic examples, it took my mind back to when I was in Iceland last year at the Althing, which is in Thingvellir, an important place in the countryside of Iceland between two volcanic plates, where from 930 AD the oldest parliament sat. But of course that wasn't a parliament with a a sense of equality like we have now. The franchise wasn't what it was. Human rights weren't what they were. Engagement wasn't what it is now. And whether it's thinking back to Iceland or ancient Greece, as I cited earlier, or indeed as we walk around the old town here in Edinburgh and think about the progress that's been made in our country, what a remarkable journey we've been on and how precious it is. Such progress has been made. There is much to be positive about. When I think back to being a child when this Parliament was began, it started off with the ethos, of course, of being more accessible, more engaged with the public, easier to access and participate in than other examples. And I have to say that there is much to commend with regard to that, thanks to the staff of the Parliament who do their work to create that greater engagement, and also the approach that's taken. The clearest example I always go back to is the 2nd of July 2016, the first formal opening that I took part in as an MSP. And I remember very well the late Queen addressing us from where you are now, Presiding Officer. And literally within an hour or two later, there were children in that seat at the official opening of the Parliament. And to me, that symbolised just how accessible this chamber is as we open the doors and let the people in. So there is much that's been done that's good. And the work of the People's Panels that is summarised in this report and the propositions in the blueprint speak well to that. I think also of what we've mandated the government to do in certain ways as a Parliament. For example, the experience panels that Social Security Scotland have, which have provided invaluable insights to the creation of our new social security system, utilising the powers of the 2016 Scotland Act. And other members have talked about, whether it's in the supermarket or out and about at community events or wider engagement, the importance of all of us going into the community and being accessible, doing our surgeries, attending events, supporting organisations. That is the work of politics just as much of what happens in here. And I think, again, the Scottish Parliament has a lot to be proud of in that space. And this blueprint, this extra engagement of the People's Panel that is proposed will help with that. We're also communicating in a way that is helpful for creating that greater engagement. I've spoken before in the Parliament of what I call the Leith Walk test, that if you can't explain it quickly in passing to someone in Leith Walk, then you're not getting the communication as effective enough. And when we're dealing with the complexity of reserved powers, devolved powers, local authorities' powers, it is actually quite difficult sometimes. We can improve things, but we've done things well. So next time you're at the bus stop in Leith, or maybe I should upgrade that to tram stop now, but think about, could we explain the policy that we're talking about in those terms? And I think in many ways we do that well here in the Scottish Parliament. But I want to conclude by touching on how we could do participation better. And it connects with what a lot of other colleagues have said. When we're in this chamber, whenever I'm not speaking, although we've got the reminders and the architecture up here to remember those we represent, I often turn up my head to look behind. And actually, COVID affected that negatively, I think, for us in here. There wasn't, because we didn't have people up there enough, understandably, during the years of the pandemic. We maybe didn't turn our heads quite as often as we should have. And I particularly do this during FMQs, because I have had concerns way before I was elected of how FMQs is, while the most prominent shop window to our Parliament, it doesn't show us at our best. The amplification of conflict that's unnecessary, the spin game, as one speaker put it, the consideration more about what's being thought up here than what's being thought up here. We've got to improve it, because the seriousness of the times that others have articulated, too many times we hear our constituents, no matter how much we're all working hard to do good work and to do good engagement, if they're only seeing a snapshot of their democracy that is politicians taking lumps out of each other for political party gain purposes, then that doesn't show us well.
Briefly, Stephen Kerr.
I think Ben McPherson, as usual, is making a very thoughtful speech. But I think the bigger concern that I would share with him and with the Chamber is that how few people actually watch any of the proceedings of this Chamber. And that is a phenomenon that I think, in terms of viewership, is decreasing. And I think that's the bigger issue that we need to tackle, the relevance and topicality and viewability, if that's a word, of this place.
Ben McPherson.
I think that is a good intervention, and I'm grateful for it. And the reason I am is because it allows me to talk about something that I wanted to mention, which is what does grip people. And all my experience outside of this place tells me that what people want from their politicians is genuine collaboration, care for those that they represent, a sense of duty to the public interest, not playing the game of politics of how do we get one over on the other party, on the other person, over the other idea. Because the issues we face are so serious. The public know that. And the point's rightly been made that how much do people see of what happens in here? Most people aren't tuned in for some of our best work, whether that's at committee or certain debates that we have in here. What most people see is that clip on the news in the evening. And the way that that's all structured in terms of how FMQs is organised, the culture of it all, the routines and habits that have been set, what people see at that moment is not representative, I think, of what most people want, which is their politicians to be serious, be constructive, work together, achieve things, determine solutions, and then deliver them. And, yeah, I just think there's so much more that could be achieved in terms of how we present our democracy and then engage people with it, if in those circumstances where the most people are watching, we just did things slightly differently. And if you want to see how people think the way we're doing things at the moment is wrong, just turn around. The young people, the folk at the back, go and speak to your constituents and ask, do you think we could do things better in the way that we debate? Most of the time they'll say yes. Those are the answers that we need to look for.
Thank you very much, Mr McPherson. We now come to the closing speeches. There is no time left in hand. With that, I call Maggie Chapman up to 6 minutes. Ms Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Donkeys years ago, during my first term as an Edinburgh councillor, I was proud to be the first elected representative to bring in a participatory budgeting project, Leith Decides. It became possible only because of the dedication and determination of a council officer, and continues to this day in the form of Leith Chooses. I remember making the case for giving members of the public the power to choose how a small amount of money should be spent in their area. It required an acknowledgement that we should, as politicians, pass on some of the power we hold to the people we represent. But I remember too those who were very resistant to this. They were wary of the time and resources it took to organise. They were worried about losing control of decision-making. They were not sure about trusting our citizens with what was a very small amount of power. What if they make the wrong decisions, they asked. Because, of course, we politicians never make wrong decisions. So as someone who has sought different ways to include people in our decision-making, I'm pleased to have been part of this debate this afternoon. If we truly believe that deliberative democracy strengthens scrutiny, renews trust and revitalises participation, then we must also be bold enough to ask, what more can we do? Because deliberation cannot be a bolt-on. It cannot be something that happens only when committees choose to use it. It must become part of the fabric of how this Parliament listens, learns and leads. And that means going further. We must reimagine where ideas come from. Too often, the agenda is set from the top, from government priorities, committee timetables or legislative calendars. But deliberative democracy offers us the opportunity to turn that on its head. Imagine, if you will, a standing citizens' assembly, a permanent, resourced body of everyday Scots, reflective of our communities, with the power to set as well as respond to priorities. This assembly wouldn't just advise Parliament, it could identify areas that require urgent attention, issues that haven't yet reached our radar, gaps in policy, deep-rooted structural problems that our current systems gloss over. Whether it's food insecurity, youth mental health, or the democratic deficit in local government, communities know where the pain points are, so we should be creating space for them to tell us. But we must also always remember deliberation is not a destination. It is a method. It is an approach. There must always be what I would call an off-ramp, a clear pathway from conversation to change. We cannot hold a panel, publish a report, and then walk away. That would be performative, and our people deserve better. Every deliberative process must end not with thanks, but with action. Clear commitments, transparent responses, and perhaps most critically, mechanisms for feedback, so participants know how their voices were heard and what came of their contributions, as Jackson Carlaw indicated earlier. This is particularly important if we want deliberation to be widely available, because if people see no outcomes, they will disengage. If only a few privileged topics get deliberative space, we entrench inequality. The process must be accessible to rural communities, marginalised groups, disabled people, migrants, those traditionally excluded from political spaces. To achieve that, we must embed elements of deliberation across more of Parliament's work. Not every issue needs a full citizens' panel, but we can make our processes more deliberative, more participatory across the board. Imagine committee inquiries that begin not just with scoping sessions among MSPs, but with co-designed workshops involving people with lived experience. Imagine evidence sessions that include structured public dialogue facilitated by trained staff. Imagine brief micro-panels, if you like, of 5 or 6 people, randomly selected but supported, offering reflections before or after committee scrutiny. These are small steps, but meaningful ones. We can also think about deliberative tools in education. Schools, youth groups and community colleges can host mini deliberations on parliamentary issues, with outcomes fed into relevant committees. This is not just about gathering views, it is about building democratic literacy and belonging. It tells young people, your voice matters, and this Parliament is yours too. And it says that decision-making is for everybody, not just for a handful of us lucky enough to be in this place. And we must support the skills and systems to deliver this well. Deliberation needs resourcing, but more than that, it needs cultural change. It needs us, as elected members, to be open to being challenged, to listening with humility, to accepting that good ideas may come from outside these walls. I'm grateful to Maurice Golden, Ben McPherson and others for highlighting the urgent need for cultural change in this place. We have work to do. And we need our staff, our clerks, researchers, communications teams to be trained, supported and trusted to design participatory processes with care and creativity. Presiding Officer, deliberative democracy is not about a single event. It is about shifting the centre of gravity in our politics. It is about building a culture where people are not passive recipients of decisions, but co-creators of them. In a climate crisis, a housing crisis, a crisis of political trust, this is not a luxury. It is a necessity. It is time we built democracy fit for the challenges of our time, messy, inclusive, imperfect and alive. Let us not settle for anything less. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. And I now call on Alec Rowley again, up to 6 minutes. Mr Rowley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's been quite an interesting debate that we've had today. In the lead-up to the last Scottish Parliament elections, the Electoral Reform Society did a survey that showed that 2/3 of the people that was surveyed, 67% that is, said they had little or no influence over decisions that affected their local communities. So there is an issue that people do feel quite alienated. Jackson Carlow, when he was speaking, talked about the low levels of trust in politicians, and that's a fact, but I should be clear, I blame the politicians for that level of trust, and in particular the political parties. And while we've had a nice debate in here today, the reality is for the political parties that they'll be back at it, and they'll be at it every day trying to score points off each other. And that's fine if you say that's the only way you can reach power, but the fact is it's causing dwindling trust in politics, in political parties, and damaging democracy itself. We only need to look at some of the reporting that we've seen for the by-election in Hamilton, where people, well, in the second, where people are knocking on the doors and people and being interviewed, and people are saying, well, they all promise you the world when they're looking for your vote, but when they get into power, they then don't deliver. And that is pretty common. And there's a point that Faisal Chowdhury made earlier when he said it's not just about this place, it's about being out there so that people don't say you only see your politicians at election time. You actually are out there, you're listening, you're meeting with groups. And as many members in here today have said, there's a whole raft of different things that we can do in order to ensure that we try and tackle some of those issues. It'd have to be brief, yeah?
Briefly, Christine Graham.
It'll be extremely, Mr Rowley. Mr Rowley, you and Mr Rowley, myself and many other members of this chamber work very hard as MSPs, are really decent people that work for their constituents. Do you not think the media holds some blame for the way we are presented when most of us are very hard working?
Again, through the chair, Alec Rowley.
If I get a chance, I'll come to the media. But to the report to begin with, this report, I think, is a good report. I've no issues, no problems with the report generally. And I think, as Jackson Carlow himself says, this is no panacea to all the issues that's there. But it's certainly a step in the right direction, although, as Stephen Kerr has said, you're talking really over 4 years, four panels. So something between 100 and 140 people would be involved in this process. So I think, while supporting this, I do stress the limitations of it. But as Christine Graham said earlier, who is it we're trying to reach? And Evelyn Tweed referred to the presiding officer's tour that she did of the regions. And I certainly also attended the Alloa event that day and found that really quite inspiring, in fact. The opportunities that were there for us to be able to, as MSPs, to talk to others, but also to listen to the different issues that was being raised with us. So from that point of view, you know, there are many different things that we should be trying, and we should be then monitoring those, evaluating those, and seeing what is successful and what is not. Jackson Carlow also referred to the effectiveness of the committees, and that would be an issue, along with the point Martin Whitfield raises about whether the conveners, as recommended in there, would be the right way forward. Because I think there is a feeling that actually, if you elected the conveners into the committees in this Parliament, that perhaps would be more effective as well. So there's a number of areas, I think, that need to be looked at when we are looking at that. Ben McPherson touched on a number of issues in terms of how we move forward. I actually think that one of the strengths that I've seen in this Parliament in the time that I've been in it is the number of schools that visit this Parliament and the number of school pupils that come along here. If I started, many of those pupils now will have left school and will be working in different, but they'll remember the visits that they came here. And I certainly know for the region I represent, a good number of the MSPs make an effort to get along and meet with those school pupils. The education service in here does a brilliant job. And I certainly encourage, I'm constantly, through local press, through social media, encouraging people to come and visit this Parliament. I met a guy a number of months ago who was really interested in politics, and I said to him, have you ever been to the Scottish Parliament? And he hadn't. And when I said to him, you should come, I'll arrange for you to come and do a visit. And he said, I'm SNP. And I said, that'll no matter to me, come. Had a great day, went back and told others. So we should be encouraging people to come to this Parliament. The real point I wanted to make, which I'm not going to have a lot of time to make, but I really wanted to get across a point, and that is a point that Professor Jim Gallagher has made, where he says Scotland is one of the most centralised nations in Europe. And since the Scottish Parliament came into being, that centralisation has been quite incredible. And if we're serious about wanting to address democracy, then we actually have to go to the principles of when the Scottish Parliament was set up, which was, yes, you should have power coming down the way for Westminster, but then you should have power going out the way for this place, out into local authorities, into communities, and that has to be addressed as part of this. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's good to follow Alec Rowley because I think he hits the nail on the head. Because I think we in here, and he's right, it's been a nice debate, but I think we do spend too much time thinking about ourselves, and we also, as a Parliament, have a false impression of how good we actually are at that outward engagement. Yes, the Parliament might feel open and accessible to those who know about it and feel confident to come in here and engage. Yes, it might feel open and accessible, to those in close proximity to it. But for very many people living in this country, this Parliament feels remote and distant from where they live and how they live. And I worry when I hear about the Leith Walk test in relation to this proposal. I'm supportive of it. I think the scale of it makes it worth a try, and I think it is a tool in addition to the other things we do that's worth exploring. But I think the Leith Walk test is problematic because I think many people you meet on Leith Walk or on any other wander through Scotland regard the Parliament already as being a talking shop, and I'm not sure 14-minute contributions necessarily help that in the unlikely event people have tuned into this debate. And I'm not sure listening to me by the same measure will dispel that myth. But I think people already think we spend a lot of time talking, and not a lot of time doing. And I think if they hear the idea that £55,000 was going to be spent 4 times over, they probably wonder whether or not we'll be losing a few MSPs to make up the difference if we're asking the public to do more of our job. And I think there is a kind of challenge around the concept. I think it sounds nice. The evidence from those who participate within it is that it works and they feel valued and the output is useful to parliamentarians. But when you're only talking to that 100 people who are actually experiencing it for themselves, I think many other constituents, many other people across Scotland will struggle to connect with this idea. I don't think, I think they will question why it's needed, why the existing committee structures don't work, why MSPs don't communicate better with the public. So I think we've got a big job of work if we want to go down this route in actually selling it to the wider population, people who are disengaged, who are disinterested already, because I'm not sure this is a meeting point that's going to engage or capture their interest. And I was interested, listening to Christine Graham as I intervened to say, around the other techniques that are used. And I think some of those can be certainly...
Maurice Golden.
I thank the member for taking the intervention. I just wonder whether the advantage of these people's panels is the format of them that allow particularly people with lived experience to contribute, whereby a very formal committee session where members might be, or witnesses might be sitting at the, at the edge of a very large table, and actually for getting those views into our democratic structures, then this is a very interesting portal in order to gain and glean that lived experience.
Oliver Mundell.
I thank the member for that intervention. That's the point I was coming to in relation to Christine Graham. I think there are better ways of engaging people within committees, and we've got some very good committee clerks and others with great experience within this building who find ways and means of doing that. And I often find, I'm not currently lucky enough to be a committee member, but having been on many committees across the time I've been here, I have seen that done well, but it's often actually the MSPs who are most resistant to trying new things or doing things differently. And when we talk about, I will in a second, when we talk about doing things differently, engaging new approaches, following evidence-based approaches, it's often MSPs that want to go to the usual suspects who want to bring in these organisations, because it's MSPs that want their moment in the sun, not literally the sun, but probably the Sun newspaper, giving the professional witnesses a dressing down, capturing a 30-second clip for their social media. And I think there's more we could do there to actually make sure we're getting the best evidence. But I'll take a quick intervention from Christine Graham.
Christine Graham. Two comments. First of all, it certainly wasn't, when we had our usual suspects, for lack of an effort on behalf of myself and committee members and the officials to have other people come in. You couldn't really compel them. You can, but nobody's ever used it. But secondly, the private briefing was so important that I refer to, in that these people could speak off the record. That was so important, that they were free to say what they did, vulnerable and so on. And while we couldn't directly refer to it, it was at the back of our minds when dealing with evidence, oral evidence before us in a formal capacity later.
Oliver Mundell.
I thank Christine Graham for that intervention, and I've had the same experience on the Justice Committee, the Education Committee, and I think sometimes we're too keen, which is a balance between transparency and proper process. But I think sometimes we're too keen to put witnesses in front of the camera to have that really formal evidence-taking process. And sometimes, with the expertise there are within the Parliament, I think there are better ways that we can do that. But despite these reservations, if you want to call them that, I think that there is merit in the proposal on the scale that's being proposed, to see how it works in practice, to gather that evidence and to see where it takes us. But I do come back to the point I made earlier on. I think if we're going to go down this route, we have to do a job of work to explain it to the public, to justify its expenditure. £55,000 per panel might seem modest to us, but to many of our constituents, it will seem like the Parliament spending more money on something that isn't one of their core priorities. So I think we have to make sure, if we're going down this route, we make it work, and we make sure that the input that comes from the public, I think as Christine Graham and others have said, isn't treated with lesser respect or value than MSPs, and it makes genuine changes to policy and to outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on the Minister.
Thank you, President Officer. Can I begin by thanking the committee again for bringing forward this subject matter for debate. I think it is an important issue for us to consider how we can best enable participation from a wider range of people in the activities of this Parliament. I want to try and pick up on as much as I can in terms of what has been said over the course of today's debate. First of all, say to Jackson Carlo, I'm not sure who it was from his side who's proffered the suggestion that there should be some form of Scottish-style second chamber in the guise of a House of Lords. I can absolutely assure him that this government has no plans to facilitate or enable the creation of a Scottish House of Lords. And indeed, as an aside, and this speaks to us being accountable and responsive to Parliament, as Mr Kerr is rightly concerned about, having been charged with bringing forward regulations to ensure that peers of the realm cannot participate as members of this Parliament, that work has been taken forward. We'll be happy to update Parliament in due course. I want to quickly pick up on remarks from Stephen Kerr. He is quite correct, of course, to say that any speaker gets to choose what they say. I suppose he's right to say they also get to decide what they meant. All I can respectfully say in response to his suggestion that the Scottish Government somehow has been involved in the choosing of the participants in these panels is not accurate. So in that sense, I have no idea what he meant, but at least I did hear what he said. A number of members spoke of the challenges of trust in democratic institutions and people's concerns about the ability to influence decisions being made. Maurice Golden and Maggie Chapman at the outset of this debate. Alex Rowley has just said similar. We are not, I should say, President Officer, unique in that regard. It's not just the Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament that suffers from such institutions across the rest of these islands, and indeed further afield suffer from similar. But I would observe, and there is international experience to suggest and demonstrate such, that these are not insurmountable challenges. If you take the case of Taiwan, for example, at one stage trust in government there was as low as 10%. Through a variety of means of seeking to re-engage with their wider population and involve them in their deliberative process, largely through electronic and digital means, trust in government there increased to 70%. That is a fairly dramatic shift and shows us what is possible. I was just about to come to Mr Whitfield, so I'll give way to him.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Presiding Officer. I will hopefully preempt that. Does the Minister share my concern that we exchange the word government for Parliament far too frequently within this place, and actually it becomes quite a challenge to identify what it is we're talking about and who it is we're talking about that's taking decisions?
Minister.
I'm not convinced we do it too often in this place, but I do recognise and understand the point that he makes around there sometimes being confusion in terms of the delineation of responsibility. And that does neatly lead me on to responding to a point he made, because he raised the issue about where responsibility should lie for this area of activity. He talked about the Scottish Government, Citizens' Assemblies that we undertook. He raised some concerns around those processes. We're happy to engage with him to hear more about that. I should say we did have positive feedback from participants. They've been well remarked upon internationally. And then he posited the example that we are discussing today around the Parliament taking forward citizens' panels. So where should the balance of responsibility lie? I mean, again, I would be happy to engage in dialogue around that. I think the truth is that responsibility probably lies between both government and Parliament. I think both have a role, and indeed, let's not block out the role that local government has as well. Local government has responsibility for many of the day-to-day issues that most directly impact people's lives. They have a responsibility as well. I think the fundamental point would be, and I think this probably speaks to another point that was made around, and I think again it was Mr Whitfield that made this point, should the purpose of these panels just be about enhancing the reputation of Parliament? It absolutely should not, by my estimation, although again, of course, I'm speaking on behalf of government, it's for Parliament to determine these things, but they should have purpose. They should have some form of a meaningful role in terms of influencing public policy, and also the suggestion that was made again by Mr Whitfield about them being involved in pre- or post-legislative scrutiny, I think, is an interesting one that could be explored further. The issue of cost of these processes was also raised. Maggie Chapman raised it, and I largely agree with the point that she made. The price being paid is worth it in terms of participation, but we shouldn't pretend, of course, that cost isn't a factor. And the Citizens' Assembly model that the government took forward, has taken forward previously, was a pretty expensive means by which to achieve the outcome of participation. I hear the point that Oliver Mundell makes around the perception of cost of the panels that the Parliament might take forward. Certainly by comparison to the process that we took forward previously, they were, I think, what could be reasonably said, more cost-effective if I could put it that way. And indeed, now we are helping fund the Citizens' Assembly in Dunfermline for a much lower cost at £50,000. These are factors. Of course, cost has to be a factor, but I don't think it's beyond us to achieve a process, a means by which it best achieves meaningful participation. Going back to the point that we just talked about, the purpose of these processes, on indeed, as Evelyn Tweed rightly identified, how we can involve those who might be marginalised through issues such as disability or socio-economic status, or indeed, as I think Mr Mundell alluded to, perhaps being marginalised by being further afield from this Parliament. So issues of inclusivity as well as purpose can be considered balanced against how we actually pay for these processes. I don't think it's beyond us to consider how we do that properly. I think I have 8 minutes in total. Is that right, Presiding Officer? So I think I have not got time to give way to Mr Golden. Otherwise, I would have been delighted to. Let me conclude then by reflecting on, I think, the contribution of Ben McPherson in particular. He, first of all, I should say, I very much enjoyed his notion of the Leith Walk litmus test. I think we could all probably apply that to our own constituencies in different ways, perhaps even including going to Tesco, as Christine Graham mentioned. But irrespective of the case for reform of our process, he reminded us of the founding principles of this institution, one of which was accessibility. And I don't think we should beat ourselves up. I think we do that fairly well. But I suppose the purpose of this debate is to remind ourselves that we can always seek to do better. In that regard, I very much welcome the fact that the committee brought forward its report. I very much welcome the fact we've had this debate. And of course, the government will be happy to engage with Parliament in any way it can to help make sure that we continue to refine and improve our processes for deliberation and public participation.
Thank you. And I call on David Torrance on behalf of the Citizen Participation and Public Petitions Committee to wind up the debate.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and also to all my colleagues that have participated in today's debate. The Citizen Participation and Public Petitions Committee work on participation has been so long running that only a convener and I have lasted long enough on the committee to see it through from the start. Well, I'm not going as far back as Jackson Carlo, back to Greece times. And having been there from the start of this work, it has been a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Listen to the debate is in so many ways a culmination of our work. Before I begin, I'd like to share some of the comments made by those who have taken part in the panels have been made about this process. We know from the evaluation reports that a vast majority of people find participation in the panel to be a positive experience. This is summed up in one of the comments we received from the panellists that stated, "I would strongly recommend anyone who is selected to go onto the People's Panel in future to participate. It's a great experience and a unique opportunity. This is also clear evidence that the panellists find the process increased their understanding of the work of the Parliament. We heard that interacting with diverse individuals, listening to their views and challenges gave me an overall perspective about the democratic process." Reflecting on the speeches this afternoon, Jackson Carlo and Minister Jamie Hepburn, Maggie Chapman and Fossil Chowdhury all highlighted the satisfaction of participants taking part in the People's Panels and backed it up with some powerful quotes. On Christine Graham's point about reaching people who have not engaged at all before, we know that at least one of the panellists here today had never voted before and yet, although taking part in the panel, not only engaged with the process, but also continued to engage with the parliamentary process as seen by their presence here today. On Stephen Kerr's point about how positive impact on 25 people can have, a wider disenchantment with politics, as the convener said, panels are not the only answer, but are an important part and play an important role in this. As for the rest of Stephen Kerr's 15-minute speech, I was waiting on bringing out his party membership for the Reform Party. My committee colleague Maurice Gomes has also made some important points about trust in politics, a theme also picked up by Maggie Chapman. We both made a point that we must look to ourselves when it comes to declining trust in politicians. And Martin Whitfield in his speech talked about a very proposals could be further developed, and continuous improvement and innovation is an important part of what the committee wants to see. Evelyn Tweed spoke more about a targeted approach for marginalised groups and communities. One of the benefits of embedding people's panels is that it will also embed and renew our skills at facilitating deliberative events so that we can use these in a range of different participation approaches. This also touches on the points raised by Oliver Mandel and Christine Graham about making sure we also continue to seek ways to engage with the widest possible range of people across community security work. While I have said that this debate in many ways is a culmination of the committee's work, it is also hopeful that it is just the start of the next phase of Parliament's approach. Should the Parliament agree to a motion before it today, then officials will prepare for 4 panels to take place in Session 7, in line with the approach set out in the blueprint. So I want to use my time this afternoon to speak more about the future of this work and how it will evolve. The blueprint sets out a number of principles for best practice in deliberate work, notably that the process should be transparent and that deliberate approaches should support scrutiny. The blueprint also sets out more detailed principles for the use of people's panels. These cover how the panels should be used to support committee work, how topics should be selected and how panels should be delivered. The blueprint is clear that the primary purpose of people's panel is to contribute to informed and evidence scrutiny. We've heard some fantastic examples today of how panels have already contributed to scrutiny so far, and if the Parliament endorses the blueprint, officials will use this knowledge for the panels today to make sure that the committees in Session 7 have the tools and information they need to get the most out of people's panels. The blueprint also sets out expectations that committees will give to consider responses to recommendations from panel and make the fullest possible use of panel's recommendations in their own scrutiny work. This doesn't mean the committees are obliged to accept all the recommendations a panel make, but they should give the work of a panel proper consideration. With only 1 panel per year, it is vital that the committees make the best possible use of this resource. Again, officials will make sure that the committee have information, tools and resources to do this. Principles for topic selection are set out in the blueprint and are based on the criteria developed by Professor Stephen L. Stubb during the academic fellowship of the Scottish Parliament. Professor L. Stubb's work was the first of several academics to undertake fellowship projects and evaluation contracts, and I would like to extend my thanks to all the academics who have supported the development of the blueprint. Not only does their work help us to be sure we are guided by solid principles and meeting the best practice standards, it also supports innovation and continuous improvement, and it helps us to communicate and extend our reach. In terms of delivery of the panels and the principles set out in the blueprint, underlined by some of the key elements of a panel, randomised selection, robust safeguarding and reducing barriers to participation. The principles also make out that high quality of the panels must be maintained. Crucially, the principles all set out that the question of chosen and evidence given to panels should meet high standards of transparency and legitimacy. The breadth and balance of evidence should take account of different kinds of expertise, including specialists, advocates and those who lived experience. Our report and blueprints also sets out areas where we think that the potential to further develop our approach to people's panels, continue to innovate and evaluate is an important part of the approach we have set out, and we are clear that there should be further consideration at the end of Session 7 as to what approach should be for Session 8 and beyond. The key findings, an effective way to harness enthusiasm that people feel when they take part in a panel to help increase confidence and enthusiasm, engaging with the Parliament and more widely. We know that from the evaluation that when people take part in the panel, most of them will feel enthused about the work of the Parliament and their role afterwards. Not everyone can take part in a panel, but finding ways to work with participants to spread their increased knowledge and confidence more widely will ensure that resources invested in the People's Panel has the greatest possible impact. As Scotland's National Parliament, we are one of its most high-profile public organisations. We are well connected to other legislators. We are using deliberate approaches, and we know from this that we are somewhat ahead of the game. We might consider then our role among Scottish public bodies. How much do these bodies connect, collaborate and share information, and how we use deliberative methods, and how might they balance our ability to be a role model in these bodies, with our need to carry on scrutiny of how Scotland's public services are being delivered. Another area for further development is understanding how we might increase the use of deliberative models on smaller scales, outside the People's Panel model. With a new session on Horizon, committees should be using the full range of tools available to them. And I will give you 2 examples of past works which could build upon this. We have already seen a precedent for using derivative work to involve people in the Parliament's budget scrutiny process. The Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee used such an approach during the pre-budget scrutiny in 2023 to empower participants from the Whole Family Equality Project to propose questions to the Minister as part of the pre-budget scrutiny. And I note that in the 22nd of May debate on the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee inquiry into committee effectiveness, there was an emphasis on the need for committees to spend more time on the careful development of their work programmes and scoping inquiries, reflecting the interests of the public, which also raised. In Session 5 of Local Government Communities and Committee did just this. It used an online deliberative platform to understand public priorities and community wellbeing, which led to post-legislative scrutiny of the Community Empowerment Act. The final area for further development I want to highlight in tracking the impact of outcomes panels over time, both in relationship to scrutiny, the impact and the impact of participants over time. Tracking impact over time is a long-standing challenge in the context of scrutiny. It has come up as a part of the evidence of the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee, and I've heard that during the committee effectiveness inquiry, there are no easy answers, but it will be important for panels to reflect any applicable recommendations from the SPPA's inquiry in their approach. We have spoken a lot about deliberative democracy in the form of People's Panel this afternoon, so before I conclude, I would like to come back to the other part of the report's title, indeed, debate embedding. If panels are to reach their full potential and deliver in a way we hope that they cannot be a nice to have or something that is an afterthought or other work. They must be fully embedded in the work of a Parliament. I have already spoken a bit about what might mean for committees who win a panel to support the scrutiny work, but it also means that panels should be embedded in the Parliament's wider work, looking for participation and engagement and looking at effective scrutiny. All these aspects of our work should complement and support each other. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, if we get it right, I believe the approach can have a transformational effect on the work of the Parliament and most importantly of all, on the relationship, trust and involvement that the people of Scotland have with their Parliament.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on a blueprint for participation, embedding a deliberative democracy in the work of the Scottish Parliament on behalf of the Citizen Participation and Public Petitions Committee. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, and there's one question to be put. Point of order, Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful, Presiding Officer. Our Standing Order 817 states that any member is allowed to question whether procedures have been or are being followed by making a point of order. Can I ask if you were in breach of our standing orders by not allowing me to make that point of order earlier today under 817? And also, you made it clear to the Chamber that you had not received any requests from me to meet with you. Since then, I have been asked by multiple media outlets for evidence that I had requested to meet with you, and I have... Sorry, I thought we weren't allowed to heckle. And I have...
Carry on, Mr Ross.
Thank you. I have provided that information that on Thursday and this week I have made requests to meet with you, and therefore have you reflected on your comments that you have received no invitations to meet with me and the comments you made in the Chamber earlier and in reference to 817 of our standing orders?
Thank you, Mr Ross. I have responded to your earlier points of order. With regards to the latter, the Chamber is not the place to discuss diary arrangements. That would not happen in any other Parliament in these Isles. It is not happening in this Parliament.
Further to that point of order.
Mr Ross, I'm asking you to sit down. I've responded to your point. There's one question to be put as a result of today's business. The question is that motion 17733, in the name of Jackson Carlaw, on behalf of the Citizen Participation and Public Petitions Committee on a blueprint for participation, embedding a deliberative democracy in the work of the Scottish Parliament, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. That concludes decision time, and we will now move on. Point of order, Mr Ross.
To follow up on what you have just said, Presiding Officer, that the Chamber is not the place to make diary appointments. If you, as Presiding Officer, refuse to meet with me, where else can I make these points?
Mr Ross, first of all, that has not happened. And again, this is not the place to discuss diary appointments. Thank you. We will now move on to members' business in the name of Rhoda Grant.